Howdy. This here's Professor U.D. Guru, uniquely unqualified to answer all your questions about everything. I was cursed to have a psychologist father. Not a good psychologist, not a professional psychologist, not someone educated in psychology, not even a harebrained amateur philosopher or a new age self help guru. These would have been bad enough, but I wasn't that lucky. No siree. I was cursed to have a father whose hobby was working and then trying to make up for his absence by forcing someone to talk about their feelings because he was an empathy addict. Someone who felt that if he could make someone else feel better, he would feel better for it. So he became a mood watcher and sought out ways to settle his seething guilt complex by forcing acts of kindness on unwilling recipients. In my house, you were punished for not being in the right mood because no one in my house except the dogs and cats knew that you could or should control your feelings. Of course, with the encouragement of my pets, I eventually discovered Taoism and Buddhism, but not in time to save my parents from becoming shitty parents. Not their fault. They didn't know any better. Unfortunately, as soon as I was old enough to poop and pee, I had a personality that stood out from the crowd, especially the crowd that lived in my house. My three siblings were easily taught that compared to them, I was rash, noisy, opinionated, bold, subject to fits of hysterical laughter, and high spirited. I guess my parents never heard of personality differences, but this was the birth of the age of pop psychology, so the notions that developed from neurosis into today's bloated catalog of personality disorders were starting to take over at schools and churches where religion and other forms of discipline and devotion were coming to be considered old-fashioned and naive. By the age of 2, my real personality had been shoved inside, so my personality had become an alien thing, more likely than not to pop out of me and scare people, like in the movie Alien, because that was too much energy to have hiding inside me all the time. Once I had been pegged the outsider in my own home, I don't get me wrong, I don't believe in repressed emotion hiding inside of you and making you do things. Well, maybe I do. Let's just say I don't believe in this Freudian notion that people can be cured of trauma. I mean, what goes for trauma today is 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 pretty funny. What passed for trauma in the olden days would have been, something serious, but people don't know serious anymore. It's a big old pity party these days. Once I had been pegged the outsider in my own home, of course I became the one most likely to attract the aggressive part of the family's passive aggressive playbook. After a lively round of name calling, I became the one most likely to melt down and lock himself in the only room in the house that had a lock on it, with my dad standing outside the door begging me to come out and talk about it. That last part is the kicker. While my siblings were tearing a new hole in me at the dinner table, my dad was busy silently feeding his face and eating anything that was left on anyone's plate. It wasn't until I had already tried rolling on the floor laughing and finally, in desperation, locking myself in the bathroom that he pushed away from the table and forced on me the only solution he could think of, begging for attention through a locked door. You heard me right. The mood watcher is a psychic vampire who feeds on other people's ups and downs. You learn this from, Buddhism, Taoism. The up down consumes your energy. The mood watcher freaks out if someone is not happy. He can't separate his emotional state from the emotional state of others. So in order to make himself feel better, he tries to force his goal of permanent happiness on anyone who isn't reeking of joy at the moment. It took me decades to figure this out, quite a few decades, and when I finally told him this about himself, he didn't speak to me for weeks. He didn't speak to me again until I gave him permission to, which is not a bad thing. It wasn't long after this that I left Portland, Oregon, the world capital of toxic compassion, by way of the Pacific Ocean. It was the best thing I ever did. I had no idea that in the next 20 years, America would continue going to hell in a handbasket, while I thrived in a third world country on a tiny Social Security check. I just knew that I didn't want to live alone, didn't want to live with roommates, God forbid, didn't want to live with drug addicts, including potheads, didn't want to live in a halfway house, and couldn't afford to live like a human being in the USA. And wasn't allowed to live with my family. Every single one of them had thrown me out. Not for doing something. For doing nothing, maybe, but not for doing something. So I offered to marry a woman I'd never met and learned how to live with her in the Philippines. Best thing I ever did. With occasional financial assistance from my parents in times of medical emergency and house renovations, of course. Having kind parents isn't all bad. Yesterday, when the veterinarian texted me to inform me that Rover had died, I allowed a little salt water to seep out of my face, but then I called a stop to it. A little sadness is not to be stifled. A few tears are not a problem. In fact, there's evidence that actual tears of sadness purge unwanted brain chemicals. But emotion is meant to be released quickly, quietly, cleanly, and efficiently, because emotion is a psychic waste product. And like other waste products I could mention, emotion does not exist to be wallowed in. In fact, the word emotion literally means move out. Ex motion, move out. So my act of comparing emotion to a bowel movement is not weird. It's you who are weird for not believing me. It's our supposedly progressive society that's weird for poisoning ourselves with toxic compassion. The philosopher Carlos Castaneda, who is often falsely accused of engineering the New Age, wrote that compassion is an extension of self-pity. Reading this for the first time long ago brought joy to my heart, real joy. My papa believed that kindness was the right response to everything. He boasted that when his church split into a religion faction and a good deeds faction, all the gays in town started attending his good deeds faction. He was the president of this church building committee because he was volunteered for it, and as always, he never said no. So people volunteered him for things all the time. I remember one afternoon when I was 19, I walked into my parents' house with my fake friend Ted, expecting the house to be empty. I was loudly explaining to Ted in some detail that my asshole dad was probably going to give me a hard time about wanting to use the car later that night. Ted was staring open-mouthed down the hallway and poking me in the ribs, like. So I looked, and there was my dad, putting on his tie, his face red with rage. He'd come home unexpectedly, and he'd heard every word of my diatribe. My papa strode down the hall and shook his finger in my face while sputtering self-deprecatory guilt garbage all over me and then forcing me to take the car keys and give him a ride to work. Like I said, passive-aggressive. That is one of the few terms, like masochist, projection, psychopath, that big psychology has given us to use, which aren't complete psychobabble marketing nonsense. Later on, during our nightly search for someone to get us high, Ted told me that if he had been caught spewing like that, his dad would have knocked him across the room with one of these. I want to state that I don't consider punishment to be the solution any more than I advocate fatherly weakness. I believe that children should be taught by example and by the fool around and find out principle. Let them make their mistakes, then let them suffer the consequences. Obviously, if their mistake is going to be deadly or lethal, then they need to be rescued. But today's idea of danger is a joke. Hover parents are what need to be controlled. Besides just our emotions, we need to control hover parents. Well, I don't think we can, and that's the problem. The hover parents on the loose everywhere. Children are therefore rioting for fun in every city. Hopefully not every city, and I'm not there to see it, so I have to watch it on YouTube. According to the fool around and find out principle, my dad should have taken away my driving privileges for a good solid month, at least. If he had done this, my fake friend Ted and my fake friend Breeze would have abandoned me in a hot minute. And I would have stayed home and worked on my hobbies until I got bored or wanted some money, and then I would have gone to the pizza restaurant and got a job, and by now I'd own my own pizza restaurant. But instead, what really happened is that I became a transient, living all over the western United States with any friend or relative who would put up with me for a short period of time. I'll spare you the details. This phase lasted only a few years, and I spent the next few decades trying to put myself back together. And I have never been interested in hard drugs. I've encountered them, tried this, tried that, but just for curiosity's sake, never got addicted to so-called hard drugs. But keep on listening. I have an opinion about marijuana, and you need to hear it. You might need to hear it. I ended up working about 30 different jobs and finally went on disability at the age of 48 when I could no longer get hired because my age and my resume didn't match each other in a way that business managers didn't find scary. At this time, I was no longer willing to try and control my emotions at all, and had never been given any encouragement to do so. I had only been encouraged to get help or seek counseling. And that's what's scary. Fortunately, I had read hundreds of self-help books, and finally I found the one I needed. It was called Emotional Intelligence, and it was the last self-help book I ever read. It took a long time for the whatever was in that book to catch on. That was a long time ago. That's like, I'd say 25 years ago maybe, I don't know. My fake friend Ted, on the other hand, whose father expressed his feelings with his fists, became a hardened criminal addicted to hard drugs. In his early 50s, he entered prison for life with no possibility of parole. I won't tell you what he did because it would make you sick. And he did it for $500 worth of drugs. I want to tell you what he did, but you'd be sorry if you heard it. No, marijuana is not a gateway drug. Like alcohol, it's for some people a relatively harmless way to catch a relatively harmless buzz every once in a while. For others, it's a hard drug. Now that it's 20 times stronger than it was when I was a kid, it's destroying society from the mind up. It doesn't need to be a gateway drug. It doesn't need to be physically addictive. Addictive is addictive. Don't split hairs on me. Psychologically addictive is addictive. It is its own pathway to stupidity. Doesn't need to be a gateway drug. Once upon a time, America was a strong nation populated by tough people. Then someone invented the cheap novel and learned that the more nonsense you put in it, the more people would pay for it. Pretty soon the modern human was being pumped so full of advertising for happiness that we no longer had to read it in the newspaper ads claiming to increase our health with snake oil. The medicine show became the local hospital. The snake oil pusher became big pharma and big psychiatry. Your personality quirks became horrible disorders that you could only combat with poisonous brain chemicals in pill form. The wounded warrior became the beloved prototype in Hollywood movies. The anti-hero became the subject of hero worship. Your personal collection of personality disorders became a status symbol. A sad actor is now just the sexiest. Careers in Hollywood have been built on a fella staring at his shoes. Success in a movie is complaining louder than everyone else, which somehow makes everyone happy. President Ronald Reagan shut down half the mental institutions. And I'm not saying they were a good thing, but they were always good for society and sometimes good for the people vacationing there. As for the people living in them permanently, the mental institutions were unavoidable and could have been reformed. If only they had listened to me. But I had been trained from an early age that people would never listen to me. And they still don't, because I was trained that they wouldn't. So how to make them listen to me, I don't have a clue. As a result of our getting used to seeing crazy behavior on the streets, the logical next step was for lawlessness of all kinds to take over the cities of our once tough-on-crime land. We're now inured to subway stabbings and school shootings, and the term drive-by shootings is already worn out by now. Such an event no longer raises eyebrows in our once tough-on-crime land. In my grandfather's time, a drive-by shouting might have got you arrested. And if your daddy caught you puffing on some wacky tobacco, he might kick your ass into the next county if he had any gall-danged sense. So it starts with dime store novels selling us on the weird notion that happiness is the goal in life. And from there we get the radio romance, the titillating talkies, and now modern human society is stuck somewhere between Match.com and OnlyFans.com in their eternal quest for happiness, pleasure, spiritual fulfillment, enlightenment, happy endings. Somewhere between the tents on the sidewalk, the needles in the gutter, and the poop in the streets, we're not getting the message that dystopia is not the goal, that empathy must be limited, that protecting society from the uncontrolled and from the uncontrollable is the right thing to do. And all that starts with teaching individuals from a very young age to control their emotions, and not the other way around. Your emotions should not control you. You have to learn to make your own decisions and to consider your emotions a waste product, something that is about to get kicked out the door. And I am so happy to be stuck in a third world country where drug pushers and criminals don't live very long and armed security guards stand guard outside every school, mall, hospital, and many businesses. Thanks for showing up. This here's Professor U.D. Guru, and I'll see you in the next movie. Bye-bye.
Happy, happy, joy, joy, happy, happy, joy, joy, happy, happy, joy, joy, joy.